The morning I learned what my daughter's fiancé intended to do to her. He was sitting 6 feet behind me, speaking as if I were part of the upholstery. Rain had been falling since before dawn, a cold October rain that polished every traffic light in Harborton and turned the streets into long black mirrors. I was driving east on Portside Avenue in a dark green Buick that belonged to my friend Clifton Oakes. Clifton had owned Portside Executive Car for almost 20 years. 3 weeks before that morning, Clifton had reached out asking me to take over one of his steady early route clients while he healed from knee surgery. That client was a commercial real estate consultant who went by the name Declan Hurst. Declan was also the man my daughter Clara intended to wed in 11 days. He had no idea who I was. That ought to sound impossible until you grasp one essential thing about Declan. He never truly registered people he considered his inferiors. They did not exist to him as people. A waiter was a hand delivering a plate. A receptionist was a voice tethered to a schedule. A driver was a gray head above a collar, 2 hands holding the wheel, nothing more. In all the weeks I ferried him around, Declan never thought to ask my surname. Clara and Declan had been together 14 months, yet he and I had never once shared the same room. They had talked about making the drive north to visit me near Lake Delford on 2 separate occasions, and both times Declan had canceled citing what he called client emergencies. At Christmas, he had joined a video call for under 5 minutes. The connection froze twice. Even then, his eyes kept drifting to a second phone, and he slipped away before Clara managed a proper introduction. The lone photo of me in Clara's apartment was 22 years old, dark hair, clean-shaven jaw, my late wife Vera, laughing with her head against my shoulder. The man Declan faced each morning wore a wool flat cap bifocals and the silver beard I had grown after Vera died. What he saw above all else was a driver. Welcome back to His Hidden Revenge. I'm glad you're here for this one. It's a story that will stay with you long after it ends. If these kinds of stories speak to something in you, I'd be grateful if you subscribed and gave this one a like. Before we get into it, tell me in the comments, are you listening on headphones today or through a speaker? It changes the way a story like this one lands, I think. A quick note, some details have been shaped for the purposes of storytelling, and any resemblance to specific individuals or events is coincidental. What matters is the truth at the center of it. That was enough to make me invisible. At 7:18 that morning, Declan's phone rang. He picked up on speaker while his fingers kept moving across a second device. "Tell me you fixed the language," he said. A man's voice came back. "I moved the control clause into the property schedule. She won't see it unless she reads past the signatures." Declan gave a quiet laugh. "She never reads past the signatures. She reads the first page, asks whether I trust it, and signs." My grip tightened on the steering wheel. Declan had always talked loosely in the car. He had belittled staff, lied to clients about being stuck in traffic. When I had picked him up ahead of schedule and once rehearsed an apology to Clara for a dinner he had every intention of skipping. Nothing had readied me for what came next. "Once we're married, Clara transfers Witten Court into Portside North," he said. "We refinance straight away, pull the equity, and close with Crestline Development before Christmas." The other man paused. "What about the father?" Declan glanced out at the rain. "Gerald has a life occupancy agreement on Cottage 1. According to Clara, he's 72 and sentimental. We give him 90 days to move. If he resists Dr. Shea's documents, cognitive concerns, and we let the trustee petition handle the rest." For several seconds, the only sound inside the Buick was the sweep of the windshield wipers. Witten Court was not an empire. It was 12 small brick cottages arranged around a garden on the south side of Harborton. Vera and I had devoted 31 years to building that place. She had worked as a geriatric nurse. I had managed buses for the City Transit Authority. We bought the first 4 cottages when the neighborhood was run down and rents were modest. Over the years, we restored them, adding ramps, rails, wider doorways, and emergency call systems. We kept rents low for retired teachers, mechanics, clerks, nurses, and widows who wanted their independence without the loneliness that so often came with it. Vera called it a village for people who had spent their whole lives looking after everyone else. After she died, I placed Witten Court into a family trust. Clara was the future beneficiary. I remained trustee and held lifetime occupancy of Cottage 1, the unit Vera and I had used whenever we came into the city. Declan apparently knew enough to want the property, but not enough to understand how it had been protected. Over the speaker, the other man said, "If she finds out about Crestline, the wedding is over." "She won't," Declan replied. By the time she understands what she signed, she'll be my wife. The loan will be funded, and her father's little retirement village will be a demolition site. My mouth went dry. We stopped at a red light alongside St. Brendan's Church, where Clara and Declan were due to be married the following Saturday. Declan leaned forward and tapped the back of my seat. "Can you take Caldwell Street instead?" he said. "I can't be late." "No, sir. No, please." Not even my name. "Of course," I said. My voice came out level. 38 years in public transportation had schooled me in keeping my voice level while brakes failed, passengers brawled, storms closed roads, and supervisors found the nearest available scapegoat. Level did not mean weak. It meant I was still working out what to do. As I turned onto Caldwell Street, my eye caught the small notice Clifton had fixed beside the rear door. For passenger and driver, safety audio and video recording may be in use. Declan had ridden beneath that notice for 15 mornings and never once taken it in. I did not smile. I did not confront him. I delivered him to the glass entrance of the Aldgate Tower and watched him climb out without opening his umbrella. A young security guard jogged into the rain to retrieve it. Before the door swung shut, Declan bent toward the car. "Tomorrow at 7:00, he said. "Don't make me wait." Then he walked away carrying plans for my daughter's future inside a leather briefcase. I waited until he vanished through the doors. Only then did I let out the breath I had been holding. My first instinct was to ring Clara. My second was to drive back around March through that lobby and pin Declan against the marble with words he would carry to his grave. Neither instinct would keep my daughter safe. Clara loved him. Worse, she trusted him. If I came at Declan without proof he couldn't talk his way around, he would use my accusations to confirm every story he had already told her about the overbearing father who couldn't let go. So I opened the center console, took out Clifton's route notebook, and wrote down every word I could recall. Then I called the one person who had known Vera's trust as well as I did. "Audrey," I said when our attorney picked up, "I need to know whether someone can steal Witten Court with a signature." She was quiet for half a second. "Who is trying?" I looked through the wet glass at the building where Declan worked. "The man my daughter is about to marry." Audrey Sung did not field serious questions over the telephone. That was one of the reasons I trusted her. "My office at 10:00, she said. "Bring the trust binder and don't speak to Declan until we know what we're dealing with." I told her I understood. Then I sat in the car another minute listening to rain drum against the roof and thought about all the ways a father can lose a daughter while still knowing her address. Clara and I had once been close enough to finish each other's sentences. When she was 8, she would ride along on my Saturday inspections at the transit depot, hauling a clipboard nearly as long as her arm. By 12, she could identify 3 varieties of engine trouble by ear. At 17, she announced she had no interest in fixing buses or managing property. She wanted to become a physical therapist because she had watched her mother help frightened elderly patients find their footing again after surgery. Vera cried with pride. I pretended something had blown into my eye. The distance began after Vera's diagnosis. My wife had pancreatic cancer. By the time we knew the doctors were measuring life in months rather than years. Clara was 34 at the time, freshly divorced and working to put herself back together. She drove up every weekend. She cooked, cleaned, kept track of medications, and sat beside her mother through nights when the pain made sleep impossible. I responded to fear by trying to control everything. I kept charts. I questioned nurses. I corrected Clara when she measured out medication 5 minutes late. I criticized the food she brought the route. She took the shoes she wore on icy steps. None of it mattered. I knew it didn't matter even as the words were leaving my mouth, but finding fault with small things gave me somewhere to put a terror I had no power to correct. 3 weeks before Vera died, Clara stood in our kitchen with tears running down her face and said, "Dad, I am losing her too. Stop treating me like another problem you have to manage." I should have apologized right then. Instead, I told her I had no time for drama. There are sentences a person regrets before they have even finished saying them. That was one of mine. After the funeral, Clara returned to Harborton. We talked every Sunday, but those conversations grew careful. Weather work, small repairs. She stopped telling me about the people she was seeing until things were already serious. When she told me about Declan, the announcement carried the tone of a decision ratified by some committee I hadn't been invited to join. "He's steady," she said. "He makes me feel safe." I wanted to ask whether a steady man canceled every visit to her father. I wanted to ask why she sounded as though she were defending him before I had raised a single objection. Instead, I said I was glad she was happy. That was 14 months ago. Now, driving out toward Lake Delford to retrieve the trust binder, I turned Declan's call over in my mind. The recording system belonged to Clifton's company. I wasn't sure whether the audio would be clear, whether it could legally be used, or whether the equipment kept more than 24 hours of footage. I rang him from a gas station. "How is the knee?" I asked. "Ugly enough to frighten children." "Why does the Buick record cabin audio?" He dropped the joke in his voice. "Yes, 30-day loop. There's a notice on both doors. Why?" "I need this morning preserved." Clifton had known me for 45 years. We had worked side by side at Harborton Transit until he left to start the car service. He didn't ask me to explain myself. "I'll lock the file from the office portal," he said. "Do you need police?" "Not yet." "Do you need me?" That question very nearly broke the composure I had been holding together. "Soon," I said. At home, I found the blue trust binder, exactly where Vera had always kept important papers, on the bottom shelf of the cedar chest beneath the manual for a lawnmower we had long since replaced. Her handwriting still showed on a yellow tab. "Jerry, do not lose this." I sat down at the kitchen table and pressed my thumb over the faded ink. "I'm trying," I told the empty room. The trust paperwork was thick, but its architecture was straightforward. I was trustee. Clara could only step into that role following my death or a formally confirmed incapacity verified by 2 independent licensed physicians, with no financial stake in the estate. Any major decision to sell or encumber the property required both the trustee and a separately appointed trust protector to agree. Audrey held that position. Vera had pushed for that safeguard after one of her patients lost a home to a grandson armed with power of attorney. Declan had no lawful route to moving Witten Court, since Clara held no outright ownership. But if he talked her into signing falsified paperwork, then used those documents to secure financing or manufactured the appearance of her authority, the harm could still be severe. A lender could lock down accounts. Tenants could find notices at their doors. Legal costs could hollow out savings. Clara's professional name could be destroyed if it surfaced on fraudulent guarantees. Tucked behind the trust agreement, I found something else, the personal letter Vera had written to Clara. "My darling girl, Witten Court is not simply property. It is a promise. Your father and I wanted to protect you, but we never wanted to imprison you. If keeping it becomes a burden, make a thoughtful decision with people who love you and have nothing to gain from your choice." I went back over that final line. People who love you and have nothing to gain. Declan had something to gain. How much I still hadn't calculated. By 10, Audrey was already in her conference room. She was 68, compact, silver-haired, and precise, in a way that made everything around her seem slightly careless by comparison. She worked through my notes without interrupting. Then she reviewed the trust and set down her tortoiseshell glasses. "He cannot move the property through Clara," she said. "Not legally, but the phrase control clause in the property schedule worries me. He may not be after a title transfer at all. He may be positioning Clara as personally liable to a company asserting a contractual claim against the property. Can anything be done? We block what we can see. Then we force him into the open." She studied me. "Does Clara know?" "No." "Why not?" I could have laid the blame on Declan. The honest answer was harder. "Because she has reasons not to trust my red on her life." Audrey leaned back. She had managed Vera's estate and watched us through our worst stretch. "Gerald, saying that out loud may be the most useful thing you've done all morning. I chauffeured a criminal through rush hour traffic without running him into a bridge rail." "Second most," she said, closing the binder. "You need evidence, but don't forget that Clara is not an asset. You cannot safeguard her by sealing her inside another legal instrument. The choice of what happens next is hers. If she stays with him, we protect Witten Court, give her every fact, and let her make an adult mistake." The words stung because I had no answer for them. My phone buzzed. A text from Clara. "Dinner tonight. Declan says he finally has a free evening. I want my 2 favorite men to meet before the wedding." Beneath it, a photograph of Declan smiling in the same suit he'd worn in my back seat that morning. Audrey glanced at the screen. "You wanted him to reveal himself," she said. "Tonight could be your opening." I typed slowly. "I would love that. What time?" I deleted it 3 times before sending, because my hands had begun shaking. Clara picked Corsetti's, a small Italian place by the river, where Vera and I had celebrated our 30th anniversary. I arrived first and chose a seat with a clear line to the entrance. At 6:42, Clara came in wearing a burgundy wool coat and the garnet earrings her mother had given her. For one unguarded moment, I saw the 18-year-old who left for college with 2 suitcases and more confidence than money. Then Declan followed her through the door. His eyes went straight to me. I watched for recognition and saw it refuse to come. What he found was an older man in a dark jacket, no cap, no bifocals, and his expression settled into courteous, measuring blankness. He waited for Clara to tell him whether I counted. "Dad!" She put both arms around me. "You're early." "Transit people treat on time as late." She laughed. Declan didn't. "Declan, this is my father, Gerald Whitten. Dad Declan." For the first time in 3 weeks, Declan looked squarely at my face. Something shifted around his mouth, small but visible. He knew. "Mr. Whitten," he said, reaching for my hand. The palm was cold. "What an honor. Clara mentions you constantly." "Does she?" "Every day." His recovery was almost seamless. Men who live the way Declan lived practice composure the way surgeons practice sutures, because one visible tremor can cost them everything. Clara looked between us. "Have you two met before?" Declan moved first. "I don't believe so." I held his eyes. "I've seen him from a distance," I said. His fingers closed around mine once, then let go. Through dinner, he performed warmth with the efficiency of someone running through a checklist. He asked about my drive. He praised Whitten Court. He spoke of the respect he had for what Vera and I had spent a lifetime creating. "Older Americans deserve safe, dignified housing," he said. The man who had assigned me 90 days to clear out now described that same property as something worth honoring. Clara absorbed each gracious sentence like evidence she had been waiting to collect. I asked how work was treating him. "Demanding," he said. "Harborton is shifting fast. Major capital is moving toward the South Corridor. Near Whitten Court," his fork stalled over the plate. "Near a good many places. Someone mentioned Crestline Development recently. Are they acquiring in that area?" Declan smiled, but the tissue around his eyes went rigid. "Where did you hear that? Drivers pick things up." Clara looked puzzled. Declan reached for his water. "Crestline looks at a great many opportunities. Most collapse. And Portside North Holdings." The glass reached his lip but didn't tilt. Clara turned to me. "What is Portside North?" I was hoping Declan might explain. 3 full beats passed without anyone moving. Then Declan laughed, relaxed, unhurried. "A dormant holding vehicle. A client built it around a riverfront deal that never came together. Gerald, I owe you an apology." He extended a hand across the table, not quite touching me, but angling it where Clara could see. "I recognized you the moment I walked in. I should have said so immediately. I was embarrassed." "About what?" "You were in the car this morning during a work call, an unguarded one. The conversation modeled a hypothetical redevelopment scenario, and we used Clara's circumstances as the example because the details were already familiar. It was poor judgment." The lie was polished and nearly elegant. Clara stared at him. "You discussed me with a client?" "My partner, Pierce. We were stress testing contract language picture, a family trust, an adult beneficiary and elderly trustee. I reached for names I knew to make the scenario concrete. You said I never read past the signatures," she replied. Declan's face softened. "A clumsy joke. I'm sorry." He turned toward me. "And I'm sorry you heard it without context. I understand why it alarmed you. I had expected flat denial. I hadn't anticipated that he'd admit to the call and simply reframe it. It was precise work. The recording alone wouldn't establish intent. He had already built a plausible wrapper around every word." Clara looked at me. "Dad, is that what happened?" There it was, the first choice. I could blow the evening apart, recite the 90-day line name, the scheme demande, she walk out with me. Declan had prepared for exactly that. My anger was the instrument he needed. It would make his steadiness read as innocence. "That's Declan's account," I said. His smile settled back into place. Clara didn't smile. She set her napkin beside her plate. "Why didn't either of you tell me before dinner?" "I needed to see him first," I said. "And I wanted to explain in person," Declan added. She looked from one of us to the other. "You both decided what I should know and when." The disappointment in her voice hit harder than anger would have. "You're right," I said. Declan started. "Clara." "No, Dad admitted it. Let him finish." I set my hands flat on the table. "I heard something that frightened me. I should have called you that morning. I held back because I feared you'd see it as me trying to manage your choices." "Were you?" "Part of me wanted to." Declan adjusted in his seat. But that isn't my place, I continued. I'm asking for 48 hours before you sign anything tied to Witten Court, Portside North, a loan or a company guarantee. Clara's eyes narrowed. What document? Declan exhaled the sound of a patient man, misunderstood. The prenuptial agreement lists separate property in a schedule. Witten Court appears because Clara may someday inherit it, nothing more. Has she received the final version? I asked. The attorneys are still working on it. Who is representing her? We talked about using the same firm to hold costs down. Audrey had flagged precisely that possibility when I was still sitting across from her. Clara's eyes moved to Declan. You said your attorney could walk us both through it. He can do that. That's not the same as having my own lawyer. The first crack showed, and Declan felt it. His hand covered hers. You're free to bring in independent counsel. I've never suggested otherwise. He managed it so well that I understood right then why she had believed in him. Every limit someone else drew, he found a way to claim as his own proposal. Dessert sat on the table untouched. Talk shifted to flowers, the guest list, the weekend forecast. But something in the room had altered. When we rose to go, Clara's hug lasted half as long as it had at the start of the evening. I'll call in the morning, she said. Declan held still until Clara disappeared toward the restroom. Then he moved to within a breath of me, close enough that no one nearby could catch it. You should have kept driving, old man. His expression stayed easy and pleasant for the room. You should have read the notice on the door, I said. It was the first moment that night Declan looked genuinely afraid. Clifton was at his office before sunrise. One crutch beneath his left arm, fury held tight in every line of his face. I let it run once he said. Then I had to stop myself from driving straight over to Hurst's place. You and me both. Portside executive car operated out of a converted service station behind the old bus depot. Clifton's office still smelled faintly of motor oil and peppermint drops. We pulled chairs up to the desk, while he unlocked the recording file. The interior camera had caught the back of my head, and Declan in the rear seat. The disclosure notice sat in the lower corner of the frame. His voice came through cleanly. So did the voice of the man Declan called Pierce. We listened to every minute of it. There was considerably more than I had taken away with me. Earlier in the recording, before Witten Court came up, at all Declan and Pierce had been working through a debt owed to something called Ironwood Capital. Declan said Clara's paperwork had to land before the 15th, or Ironwood would move to file. Pierce noted that Crestline Development's letter of intent required unencumbered authority to transfer the property. Declan answered that clean authority was a matter for the title insurer. Then, after laying out how a cognitive petition could remove me, Declan said, Clara is already prepared to believe he is slipping. I have spent a year showing her. I reached over and stopped the playback. Run that again, I said. Clifton did. I have spent a year showing her. What followed was sudden and total. Memory after memory surfaced, and each one fell into a different arrangement. Clara calling to ask whether I'd missed our Sunday conversation, on a day my record showed she'd never picked up. Declan steering me away from driving at night, after I arrived 10 minutes behind in a snowstorm. Clara in her softest voice wondering whether I had mislaid trust documents that had occupied the same cabinet drawer for 9 years. He hadn't simply been planning to call me confused. He had been building that case for a long time. Clifton settled into his chair. Jerry Money is only a part of what this is. I know. Are you going to the police? With what a conversation he'll call theoretical, and a company name, neither of us can fully account for, yet along with a remark he can frame as empty bluster. He said he'd work through legal channels. Evil and illegality aren't the same thing when something is still only a scheme. Clifton disliked that answer. I did too. We made copies of the recording onto 2 encrypted drives. Clifton wrote and signed a statement, setting out the vehicle, the posted disclosure, the automatic recording system, and how the file had been kept intact. Audrey had been insistent a clean chain of custody, even if a courtroom never saw the audio. By 8 she was with us, and she'd brought a forensic accountant named Iris Delacroix. Iris had spent her career with the state banking division and now worked elder fraud cases for non-profit legal clinics. Tortoiseshell glasses in a manner like a teacher, demonstrating the controls of something that could cause serious harm. Today, we don't need to prove every sentence, she said. We need to find the pressure points. She put 4 names on the whiteboard. Portside North Holdings, Crestline Development, Ironwood Capital, Dr. Shea. Portside North Holdings is the probable receiving entity. Crestline may be the waiting buyer. Ironwood looks like the creditor with the leverage. Dr. Shea appears positioned to certify incapacity when called upon. Everything gets confirmed through proper means. Public filings documents we're entitled to request direct questions. No hacking, no trespass, no impersonation. Can I keep driving him? I asked. Audrey glanced at Clifton. Is Declan's booking still showing? Clifton checked the calendar. Weekdays straight through to the wedding, billed through his consulting firm. Then Gerald continues in the role he was already assigned. He doesn't invite conversations. He doesn't go through anything. He leaves Declan's phone alone. He drives. Iris studied me a moment. At 6:55, I pulled to the curb outside Declan's building. He came down 5 minutes late. Before getting in, he held the rear door open and read through the recording notice. Then, he found my eyes in the mirror. Good morning, Mr. Witten. Declan, I canceled this ride. Clifton's system is showing an active reservation. He checked his phone and muttered something. Then he got in and sat back. 10 minutes went by without a word. We moved through the warehouse stretch near the river. A low cloud cover diffused the morning light. His phone rang. He let it go to nothing. It rang a second time. Take the call, I said. This vehicle records as standard practice. I am aware. A third ring, and he answered no speaker. Not now, he said. A voice came faintly from the handset, words unclear. I said not now. If Ironwood comes looking, use the Crane documents. Clara's signature is Friday. He ended the call. Friday, I said, keeping it casual. His reflection came up in the mirror. Excuse me. You said Friday. I was making conversation. Don't. Silence the rest of the road. At the Aldgate Tower, after we had stopped, he didn't move to get out. Clara shared things about your wife's last months. Every muscle in my body went still. She said the strain had confused your thinking, that you tangled medication schedules, accused the nursing staff of dishonesty. Clara told you she's worried about you. I worry because she does. He shifted closer, voice dropping low, nearly gentle. One misunderstanding, and you could wreck her wedding in a way she might not get past. At your age, how many of those years do you want to lose her over? It wasn't anger. Anger I could have met. This was colder a man, reading the future aloud like weather he fully intended to produce. I turned around in my seat and looked at him straight on. Vera died with a complete picture of who I am, the worst included. My daughter has that same picture. What you carry of me is only what you can use. Declan's face went empty. Tomorrow, send another driver, he said. He got out and put the door hard into its frame. At 8:17, Clara rang. Dad, what did you say to Declan tight, frightened, furious? I drove him to his office, nothing more. He's saying you threatened to ruin his business if he didn't end things with me. I closed my eyes. He'd moved to the offense. I didn't threaten him, I told Clara. I sat at the curb beside the Aldgate Tower and watched office workers go past with their coffee and umbrellas. Declan had reached her before the elevator finished its climb. That speed told me the story had been drafted beforehand. He told her I'd demanded he step back from the Crestline project and keep away from Witten Court. That's what Clara relayed. He also said you implied you had recordings of private client calls. I told him the car records for safety. That part is true. Do you actually have recordings of him? The hurt was close to the surface. She wasn't asking only about Declan. She was asking what sort of man her father had become. The company system logs every ride. I told her yesterday's file had been flagged because it held a conversation about her property and my removal. So you listened to it? Yes, without saying anything to me. Yes. The line went quiet. 5 years ago, I'd have moved immediately to defend myself. I'd have named every threat, every reason, every way Clara had failed to grasp the weight of what was in front of her. This time, I held myself to the piece that was mine to answer for. I should have called you before we sat down to that dinner, I said. I was afraid. Fear made the call, not me. You rename it fear once it already looks like you were pulling the strings. That's fair. The silence that came back was different from the one before. Tell me exactly what he said, she asked. I went through the call as carefully as I could. I laid out Portside North Holdings, Crestline Development, the equity, the 90 days Dr. Shea, and the deliberate work to raise doubts about my mind. I held the audio back. I wanted her to receive those words from me first before she heard the voice of the man she planned to marry say them. When I finished, Clara said quietly, Dr. Shea is the physician Declan arranged for your annual evaluation. I hadn't remembered 2 months earlier, Clara had sent me the name of a concierge practice in Harborton. She'd said a client of Declan's had seen the doctor and spoken well of him. I'd thanked her and kept my regular appointment with the physician I'd had for years near Lake Delford. Have you seen him yourself? I asked. No. Declan told her the idea was getting a care plan established before I needed one. Those two words, care plan, settled in my chest like cold. Clara did. Declan put anything in front of you to sign this. Friday we're going in to finalize the prenup with his attorney. Please bring a lawyer you chose yourself. Audrey could point me to someone untouched by the trust. I knew that much. I said so. Then I went quiet. She drew a slow breath. Send me the recording. I can arrange for you to hear it with Audrey in the room. Why won't you send it to me? Because the file belongs to Clifton's firm and could become evidence. Audrey wants the original kept clean. And there it was again. Everybody's setting the terms for me. You pick the time, you pick the place, bring whatever attorney you like, walk away if you want. But I will not risk the only untouched copy on a phone where Declan can make it disappear. The words landed harder than I'd meant them to. You think he has access to my phone? Does he know how to get in? She said nothing. And do you know his silence again? That proves nothing, she said. No, it asks something. She ended the call without committing to a thing. When I reached Audrey's office, Iris had already laid out the first batch of public filings. Portside North Holdings had been incorporated 7 months earlier, with Pierce Fielding, Declan's business partner, listed as the organizer. Declan's name was absent from the paperwork entirely. The registered address turned out to be a mailbox at a shipping store. Crestline Development had filed a preliminary zoning inquiry covering the block where Witten Court stood. The filing described a 5-story mixed-use building, luxury apartments, underground parking. It stated the applicant was already in active discussions with the controlling ownership group. Nobody had discussed a single thing with me. Ironwood Capital was trickier to trace. Several companies in different states carried that name. Iris turned up a civil case filed under seal and 2 recorded liens against Declan's condominium, both tied to a private lender, whose manager's address matched an Ironwood entity. The man is carrying debt, I said. Likely, Iris answered. But owing money isn't fraud. Pledging my daughter's trust as security would be, if that's what he's done. We need the paperwork to prove it. Audrey pressed a finger to the Crestline zoning page. This hands us a legitimate reason to reach out to them directly. As trustee, you're entitled to demand an explanation of those claimed discussions. Won't that put Declan on alert? Yes. So we wait. Audrey's expression tightened. Wait for what? He said, Clara's signature happens. Friday. It is Wednesday right now. The moment he thinks I've called Crestline, he'll either speed everything up or bury whatever he was going to show her. Iris gave a slow nod. Pressure makes things move. It also makes casualties, Audrey said quietly. Then we make sure someone is standing next to Clara before Friday arrives. Later that afternoon, my daughter phoned again. I want to be there at 5 to hear it, she told me. At Audrey's office. Declan will be with me. I glanced at Audrey. That is her right, she said. At 4:57, Clara walked into the conference room by herself. All the color had left her face. She was holding a thick cream envelope. Where is Declan? I asked. He told her, if I sat through that recording, it would mean I'd already taken your side over his. She set the envelope down on the table. Then he handed me this, she said, and told me, we can still go through with the wedding if I sign by 6. Audrey's hand moved toward it, then stopped. Would you like me to go through it? Clara kept her eyes on the envelope for a long moment. Yes, she said finally. But play the recording first. We listened all the way through without a word. Declan's voice occupied the room. Clara's whole body tightened when he said she never looked past the signature lines. She shut her eyes when he got to the part about having me removed. When he described the year he had spent conditioning her to think I was losing my grip, tears traced down her cheeks quietly, without a sound. Audrey stopped the playback at the end. Clara dried her face. Go back, she said. Play the part before that. Which part? Ironwood. He told me Ironwood was lined up as a possible investor in a housing development. Play all of it. We did. When it finished the second time, Clara slid the cream envelope across the table toward Audrey. Tell me what he needed me to sign. The document inside bore the title Premarital Property and Mutual Protection Agreement. 9 pages of ordinary-looking language came first. They cataloged Declan's condominium investment accounts, consulting firm, and retirement holdings as his sole property. They set out Clara's wages, her savings, and her future beneficial interest in the Witten Family Housing Trust as hers alone. Each side released claims against what belonged to the other. Read that far, and the agreement could almost seem fair. Then came page 10, a schedule headed Joint Planning Acknowledgements. Audrey worked through it in silence, laying small yellow flags across paragraph after paragraph. The flags kept coming. The schedule provided that upon marriage, Clara would transfer all movable interests tied to Witten Court into Portside North Holdings in exchange for preferred membership units. Declan would serve as sole managing member for 10 years. He would hold authority over refinancing redevelopment, leases, sale options, and relocation arrangements. Clara would be required to assist with any action needed to establish her authority, should the current trustee prove unable or unwilling to act in the beneficiary's best financial interest. The closing sentence was the sharpest blade. By signing, Clara was declaring that she had disclosed every restriction on transfer, that no undisclosed agreement occupancy right, charitable limitation, or trust provision stood in Portside North's way. That puts the liability on her personally if the transfer ever collapses, I said. Iris said he already understands she has no real authority. So, the document makes her swear that she does. What kind of exposure? Clara asked. Whatever losses Portside North chooses to claim, Audrey replied. Attorney fees, financing costs, penalties on broken sale agreements, promised investor returns. There is nothing limiting it. Clara sat very still. Declan had told her this schedule was there to shield Witten Court from being treated as shared marital property. In fact, it does the reverse. Audrey explained that it builds a contractual road for him to seize control of the property outright. Could he actually pull that off? Not without Gerald and me. But your signature alone could let him borrow against the asserted future interests, squeeze the trust, or claim we obstructed a binding agreement. A loss in court wouldn't matter much. He could bury us all in legal proceedings for years. Clara's fingertip rested on one of the flags. His attorney described the whole thing as boilerplate. Did you have any time alone with that attorney? Declan was there the entire time. Did the attorney walk you through what Portside North actually was? He called it an estate planning structure they'd activate down the road. Audrey noted the attorney's name. I sat watching my daughter take in the reality that two men had faced her across a desk and called a trap a safeguard. Everything in me wanted to reach for her. I wanted to tell her I had seen from the start that Declan was no good, though honestly that wasn't so. Mostly what I wanted was to lift the shame off her face. What I said instead was, "What do you need from me?" She looked back as though no one had thought to ask her that in a while. I need time to think. Fine. I need people to stop deciding things for me. Fine. And I need you to leave Declan alone. That one cost me. I won't. She turned toward Audrey. Copy the document. Lock the original in this office. I'm leaving. Not going to Declan's place. I said the words out before I could hold them. Her back straightened. Dad, you're right. I'm sorry. She pressed her palms against her closed eyes. I'm not sure where I'm sleeping tonight. Clifton, who'd been sitting out in the reception area all this time, quietly offered the small flat above his office. His niece had lived there through college and left in the spring. Clara said yes because Declan didn't have that address and because it was connected to neither me nor Audrey. On her way out, she pressed her engagement ring into my hand. Hold on to this while I figure out what it's worth, she said. The stone felt heavier than any diamond had a right to feel. At 6:23, Declan rang my phone. I didn't pick up. He called a second time. Then the messages started arriving. You turned her against me. You made an illegal recording of a private conversation. You have no idea what you've set in motion. At 6:41, he sent a text. Clara is not in a stable place. Her mother's death has affected her more than you know. Keep pushing her down this road, and I'll see to it that the right people hear about everything you've done. I passed the phone to Audrey. Hold on to all of it, she said. At 7 o'clock, Declan showed up outside her building. By then, we had already slipped out through the parking garage below. A security camera caught him slamming the flat of his fist against the locked glass door, then stepping back, smoothing his jacket, and turning a pleasant face toward a tenant who'd just come through the lobby. That picture did not leave me. Violence, composure, the smile. The following morning, Iris phoned with what she'd found overnight. The document's digital metadata listed its original author as Fielding Strategic, Pierce's firm. A draft from an earlier stage had been bundled into the file by mistake. That earlier version still carried a comment bubble planted beside the unlimited liability clause. Declan had written, "Keep broad. She has personal savings," and the death benefit too. Vera's life insurance proceeds had cleared the remaining mortgages and built up reserve funds for Witten Court. Clara had been left a separate death benefit of $180,000. She'd put some toward her student debt and let the remainder sit in low-risk accounts. Declan knew every detail because she had trusted him enough to share it. There was one more comment Iris said. Next to the clause addressing an uncooperative trustee, Pierce had written, "Need Shay letter before closing." N says daughter already on board. She was never on board. I said Declan had fed his partner that line, or planned to make it true by other means. Audrey came in next, holding a copy of my medical records which she'd obtained with my authorization. "Your physician found nothing of concern at your most recent examination," she said, "but Dr. Shay's practice had submitted an insurance inquiry under your name 6 weeks ago." I never made contact with him. Somebody else had. Silence settled over the room. Identity theft, attempted medical manipulation, forged paperwork. Declan's scheme had outgrown mere bad intention and was crossing into territory where law enforcement could act. Then my phone went off. "Clara, Dad," she said, her voice tight and breathless. "Declan is standing outside Clifton's office. Are the locks on?" "Yes, get the police." "I did. He's claiming he only wants to talk." Beneath her words, I caught the sound of someone hammering on a door. Then Declan's voice broke through from the other side. "Clara, your father is lying because he knows what you did." The hammering went quiet. My daughter's voice dropped to almost nothing. "What does he mean, what I did?" Declan called back through the glass, as though the words had traveled straight to him. "Ask Gerald why your mother changed the trust 3 days before she died. There was an amendment. I had kept that from Clara. Declan was aware of it because the prenuptial agreement he'd proposed had obligated full disclosure of trust instruments. Clara had handed his attorney an outdated summary she'd come across in her own records. That attorney must have set it beside a title record or a later certificate and noticed the trust date didn't line up. By the time officers arrived, Declan had gone. Clara stayed inside with Clifton while Audrey and I made our way over. The door opened before our knuckles reached it. "What amendment?" she said. No greeting, no accusation, only the question. I pulled out a chair at the little kitchen table and sat. Clara didn't. 3 days before your mother passed, she named Audrey as trust protector and put in place a requirement for 2 independent medical opinions before anyone could have me declared incapacitated. Is that everything? No, that single syllable seemed to press against the walls. She restructured the distribution after my death. You still draw the income and may occupy any cottage, but Witten Court cannot go to a private developer unless at least 9 of the 12 tenants give their approval, and an independent housing nonprofit certifies that uprooting them would cause no harm. Clara held my gaze without blinking. "Why was I never told Vera asked me to hold off until you felt ready to take a hand in running things? I am 39 years old. I know that. When were you going to decide I had reached that point? Nothing I could say wouldn't expose me? Dad, I don't know." She drew out a chair and gripped the back, but stayed on her feet. "Declan told me you never saw me as capable of handling the property. I stood up for you. I told him Mom would never have handed you full control on your own. She didn't. Audrey holds the trust protector role. That isn't the point." No, I agreed it isn't. The secret carried its own long history. In the final days of Vera's life, Clara had been hollowed out by exhaustion and grief. She'd told her mother she wanted no part of building's tenants or maintenance, that she wanted her parents to liquidate Witten Court and use what was left to make the remaining time count. Vera understood those words for what they were, pain-talking, not a settled decision. She also carried a quiet fear that someone might one day be drawn to Clara for what the property was worth before ever caring about who Clara was. So Vera asked Audrey to draw up the amendment and asked me not to lay any of this on Clara while the wound was still open. After the burial, each month produced a fresh reason to delay. Clara was piecing her career back together. Then came the divorce. Then our estrangement. Then the silence settled in, and staying quiet grew easier than telling the truth. I convinced myself I was keeping faith with Vera's wish. What I was also doing was holding on to something I wasn't ready to share. Your mother wanted you looked after. I told Clara I had let that purpose serve as cover for not trusting her. It was wrong of me. She finally sat. Did Declan have the precise details of the amendment? He could have pulled a certificate that confirmed restrictions were on record, nothing more. He probably grasped enough to know your name alone on any document would be insufficient. So, by writing that, I had warranted no restrictions existed. He set up a failure that would fall on your shoulders. Clara's eyes moved to the bare plaster above the table. Two men withheld the truth from me, each one convinced he was making the wiser choice. I didn't rush to explain the distinction between Declan and myself. A distinction existed, a real and serious one, but seizing on it too fast would have been its own form of dodging. "Yes," I said. She gave a slow nod, and what was on her face wasn't anger. It was something quieter and harder to take. "I am not marrying him Saturday." Something loosened in my chest, but before I could say a word, she lifted her hand. "That is not a victory for you. I know. I am walking away because of what he did. I am not returning under your management either. You shouldn't." She reached into my jacket pocket, withdrew the engagement ring, and placed it flat on the table. "I want every trust document, every financial statement, every tenant agreement, and every letter Mom wrote regarding Witten Court. No summaries. You will have all of it by end of day. I want my own counsel, not Audrey." Audrey nodded without hesitation. "I will put together 3 independent referrals and remove myself from advising you on personal matters. And, Dad, I want a full medical evaluation from a doctor whose name has never crossed Declan's desk. Not because I doubt your mind, because I want a record no one can distort." "I agree." Something shifted in Clara's expression, then the first softening I had seen since we walked through the door. "Good." At that moment, Clifton came in, phone in hand. "You need to look at this." Declan had put a statement out on social media. "With deep sadness, Clara and I have postponed our wedding due to a family medical crisis. Gerald Witten, who has struggled since his wife's passing, accessed private business communications, and has placed Clara under extraordinary emotional pressure. We ask for compassion and privacy while we seek appropriate care for him." Under the statement was a photograph taken of me outside Audrey's building. The comments were already piling up. Acquaintances sent their sympathies. A former colleague asked if someone was watching out for me. One commenter wrote that paranoia in the elderly could be a heartbreaking thing to witness. Declan had lifted the narrative he had been saving for a courtroom and turned it over to the public instead. Clara went through the post twice. "He didn't postpone anything," she said. I ended it. Then she had her phone in her hand. "What are you doing?" I asked, finding my footing again. She answered in 3 sentences. "There is no family medical crisis. I have ended my engagement after receiving documents I was pressured to sign without independent counsel. My father is not responsible for my decision." Within 5 minutes, Declan's post vanished, but the screenshots had already spread. The lie remained. At 11 that morning, a county adult protection investigator knocked at my door near Lake Delford, acting on an anonymous tip. The complaint held that I was disoriented, in possession of a weapon, preying financially on elderly tenants, and being used by my own daughter. Declan hadn't simply set out to damage my reputation. He had engineered a snare in which every person who vouched for me would appear to be a co-conspirator. The investigator was Gwen Fuentes. She looked to be in her 50s, dressed practically for the weather, and carried herself like someone who had long since stopped being rattled by either bluster or flattery. "An allegation is not a conclusion," she said, standing there on the porch. "May I come in?" "Yes." I called Audrey and had her connect by video. I left Clara out of it. Her public statement on my behalf had already been weaponized once, and I needed the investigator to see plainly that I was capable of holding my own without my daughter running interference. Gwen went through the kitchen, the medications, the financial records, and the locked cabinet where the trust paperwork lived. She asked for the date, the name of the governor, directions to my physician's office, and the method I used to pay my bills. Then she turned to the firearm named in the complaint. I brought out Vera's father's hunting rifle, unloaded, stored in a locked safe. I showed her the ammunition box secured separately. I handed over the permit and maintenance records. "Who was aware you had it?" she asked. "My daughter, Clifton." Declan may have heard Clara bring it up at some point. "Who stands to gain if you're ruled incapable of managing the trust? My daughter eventually, but she has never moved to take control. An entity connected to her former fiancé may be positioning to exploit her future interest." I laid out the public filings, the unsigned agreement, and the tenant's contact information. I held back the vehicle recording until Audrey gave me the go-ahead. Gwen took it in without any change in her expression. "Commercial fraud falls outside what I can pursue," she said. "But I can put on record that a person named Dr. Shea was raised in connection with manufacturing concerns about your cognition. I can also look into whether the person who filed this report identified themselves or came in anonymously. Will you be closing the case? I will go where the evidence leads. It was the most honest thing she could have told me. That afternoon, I made the drive to Witten Court. The rain had cleared, and the central path lay buried under yellow leaves. Vera had planted 2 oak trees there when we bought the first cottages. They were taller than the roofs now. Word moves fast in a tight community, all the more so when half the residents carry smartphones and the other half have grandchildren who keep watch on social media. 9 tenants had gathered in the common room. Mrs. Edna Prentice, a retired school librarian of 81, pointed at an empty chair. "Sit down, Gerald. We have questions." I sat. "Are you selling our homes?" asked Vernon Galt, a man who'd run a machine shop until his hands gave out to arthritis. "No." "Is your daughter selling them?" "She can't, and she has no intention of it." "Is someone making an attempt?" "Yes." I walked them through the Crestline development filing and the agreement Clara had declined to sign. What's coming next stopped me cold the first time I lived it. Something arrived that made clear just how far the danger had already reached and how little time remained to stop it. Before we get there, I want to ask you if you discovered someone close to you had been quietly working against you for months. Would you confront them directly, or would you go silent and build your case first? I held back the private details. What I gave them was enough to grasp the danger without turning my daughter's ordeal into something for the community to pick over. When I finished, Mrs. Prentice straightened her tortoiseshell glasses. Vera wrote a tenant approval rule. "Yes, and you never told us." One more secret. The rule sits in the trust, but I should have walked everyone through it when the amendment was drawn up. "You should have," she said. "Protection that people don't know exists is just another locked door." Clara could have said exactly that. Vernon leaned in. "What do you need from us?" "Nothing today. Don't put your name on any relocation offer, inspection authorization, or new lease without getting independent review first. If anyone reaches out to you, hold on to the message." Mrs. Prentice lifted one finger. "That's what you need us to avoid." I asked what you need us to do. I took in the faces around the room. These were not people waiting to be rescued. They had run businesses, raised children, worn their country's uniform, stood in front of classrooms, kept the books, and buried the people they loved. Witten Court had been built to preserve what they had earned, and here I was, casting them as supporting players in my own story. "The decision about how Witten Court should respond belongs to you," I said. We sat together for 2 hours. They voted to form a tenant committee of 3. They asked Audrey to arrange independent legal counsel, billed to the trust, but answerable only to the residents. They asked for written notice of every development inquiry that came in. Mrs. Prentice insisted on receiving the full amendment in large print form. Near the end, a quiet man named Harold Crane put up his hand. Harold had moved into Cottage 7, 8 months before. He was 76 with a career spent in municipal accounting. I knew very little about his personal life. He rarely turned up at community events and always had his rent in by the 3rd of the month. "You said the recording mentioned Bennett documents," he said. The room came into sharper focus. "Yes," he continued. "My full name is Harold James Crane. Do you have any connection to Declan Hurst?" Harold looked down at his hands. "He managed my retirement accounts for 6 years. No one spoke. I moved in here after my wife passed," he went on. "Declan told me a conservative income fund had dropped in value. I took his word for it. Last month, a tax form arrived for an account I had never opened. I called his office twice. Neither call was returned. How much I asked? $140,000. Iris Delacroix went to Cottage 7 before the sun went down. Working from Harold's written authorization, she went through his statements. 3 withdrawals had been dressed up as investments in private notes. The receiving entity was Ironwood Capital. Harold's signature was on every authorization page. "I did not sign these," he said. Iris examined one of the scanned forms. "Did Declan ever bring blank transfer papers to you and ask for your signature?" "After my wife died, he showed up at the house with a stack of paperwork. He said completing the forms would help consolidate the accounts. The Crane documents. Declan and Pierce had talked about using them if Ironwood Capital was ever questioned. What he had planned to do to Clara was not the first time he had reached into someone's pocket. He had already stripped money from a widower. He counted on no one believing. Harold's chin trembled. I spent months thinking I had just made a bad investment. "You trusted your advisor," I said. "At my age, trusting people is what they call foolish. At our age, they call everything foolish when it helps them take from us more easily." Iris closed the folder. "Mr. Crane, what happened to your accounts may constitute financial exploitation and forgery. Whether to report it is entirely your choice. I can lay out the options for you." Harold turned to look through the window at the row of cottages. If I report this will, people find out. Some details may become part of the record. We can request that the authorities shield private information wherever possible, but silence isn't something I can guarantee. He sat with that for a moment. My wife used to say, "Shame is a bill the thief sends to the victim." He straightened in his chair. "I'm not paying his bill." That evening, Harold put his name to a complaint filed with the State Securities Division. For the first time, we had evidence of a completed crime, not merely a scheme still in motion. Declan still had no idea. Clara spent Thursday morning dismantling her wedding. She handled it herself. I offered to reach out to the church, the florist, the hotel, or any of the 106 guests. She thanked me and said no. Every call meant saying the words out loud again. There will be no wedding. Some people pushed for an explanation. Some volunteered their opinions. One aunt told her that stress before a wedding was normal and that canceling would bring embarrassment. Clara replied that staying married to the wrong person would be far more embarrassing and last considerably longer. At noon, she sat down with Laurel Vance, an attorney Audrey had referred, but who had never worked for our family. Laurel represented Clara alone. Before that meeting began, Clara asked me to wait in the hall. I waited. It shouldn't be anything notable for a father to respect a closed door. That day, though, it was part of the work I had to do. An hour later, Clara called me back in. Laurel was 46, direct, and unmoved by the emotional weight in the room. "Clara has authorized me to handle all communication with Mr. Hurst and his attorney," she said. "You will not contact either of them regarding her. Understood. You will not issue any public statements on her behalf. Understood. If law enforcement reaches out, you may speak to your own evidence, but do not assume Clara wishes to be involved. Understood." Laurel glanced at Clara, then back at me. "She also wants unrestricted access to all Witten court records. You agreed to that?" "Yes. Not a selected portion. Everything. Everything." Clara pushed a page across the table. It listed accounts, leases, maintenance reserves, insurance policies, trust amendments, and tax returns. "I made an index," she said. Something old stirred in me. I wanted to flag 2 categories she'd left out. I wanted to sort the list by year. I wanted to explain which records should come first. I folded the page and set it in my binder. "You'll have the complete file by Monday." She caught my restraint. A faint, tired smile. "You can say something if I missed anything. Capital improvement plans and vendor contracts," she added without prompting. "Thank you." For the first time in years, the two of us were actually working alongside each other, rather than one of us trying to shield the other from the table. At 1:20, Iris received a call from the State Securities Division. Harold's complaint aligned with irregularities that had already been reported by 2 other clients of Declan's former advisory firm. One of those complaints had been closed after the client withdrew it. The second was still under preliminary review. The investigator couldn't share names, but he asked for Harold's original paperwork and requested that we preserve any recordings that mentioned the Crane documents or Ironwood Capital. Declan found out about the inquiry before 3. We knew because his attorney fired off a preservation demand to Clifton accusing Portside Executive Carr of unlawful surveillance, commercial interference, defamation, and conspiracy. The letter demanded the immediate destruction of every cabin recording that involved Declan, while at the same time demanding that no relevant evidence be touched. Clifton read that paragraph 3 times. "He wants you to destroy it and preserve it at once. He wants you scared enough to slip up," Audrey said. Clifton set the letter down. Then he picked the wrong old bus driver. At 4, Crestline Development answered Audrey's inquiry. Their general counsel requested an urgent sit-down. The following morning, 5 of us gathered around a conference table, Audrey and me, on behalf of the trust, Clara and Laurel, for Clara and Crestline's general counsel, a man named Randall Thorne. Randall set a folder on the table. Crestline had understood that Portside North Holdings held an enforceable option to purchase the Wittencourt property, he said. "From whom?" I asked. He opened the folder. The option agreement carried my signature. It was convincing. Whoever had made it had captured the shape, the pressure, and the slight unevenness in the final stroke that had been part of my signature for years. A notary seal sat below it. The document gave Portside North a 12-month exclusive right to purchase Wittencourt for $3,900,000, well under the preliminary land valuation Crestline had already obtained. Portside North had then assigned that option to Crestline for a fee of $600,000 payable at closing. "I did not sign this," I said. Randall's expression shifted. "Crestline has suspended all activity on this matter and notified our title insurer. We intend to cooperate fully with authorities." Clara studied the page. Where did Declan get Dad's signature? I already knew before anyone spoke. 2 months earlier, Declan had offered to help arrange refinancing for the common room roof project. He emailed me a confidentiality agreement before sharing any lender figures. I printed it, signed it, scanned it, and sent it back. He had walked away with a clean, high-resolution specimen. Laurel pointed to the notary's name, Brenda Alford. "Who is she?" Randall checked his notes. "An administrative employee at Fielding Strategic Pierce's firm. The option was dated 6 weeks prior. On that date, I had been 400 miles away at a transit retirement banquet in Springfield. Photographs, hotel records, and 80 former colleagues could confirm it." "Did Crestline speak directly with Gerald before accepting this document?" Audrey asked. Randall's unease was visible. No, Mr. Hurst had represented that Gerald avoided electronic communication and left negotiations to his daughter. "Did you speak with Clara?" Mr. Hurst arranged a video call. The connection dropped before Ms. Whitten was able to join. Clara looked at him. "That meeting was never on my calendar." Randall closed the folder. Their process had failed. I am not here to excuse it. His honesty didn't undo the failure, but it kept the conversation from falling apart. At 10:15, Laurel telephoned a detective in the Financial Crimes Unit. At 10:40, the detective requested copies of the option, the prenup schedule, Harold's authorizations, the vehicle recording, and Declan's messages. At 11:03, Declan sent Clara a text. "You have no idea what Pierce did in my name. Meet me alone and I will explain everything." Clara showed that to Laurel, then switched off her phone. "He chose the wrong scapegoat," she said. "How do you know?" I asked. "Because for 14 months, Declan told me Pierce was too timid to act without being given permission first. My daughter had been paying attention. The Securities Division never disclosed the name of Declan's earlier complainant. We found her because Declan himself led us there. Friday evening, while Iris was going through public court records, she turned up a motion Declan's attorney had filed 4 years prior to enforce a confidentiality agreement against a woman named Denise Keating. The case was resolved by agreement after 3 days. The public docket didn't spell out the underlying dispute, but Denise's name also appeared as the organizer of a dissolved company with ties to Ironwood Capital. Laurel reached her through a business address, giving no detail about Clara's situation. She said only that Declan Hurst had presented documents involving Portside North Holdings and asked whether Denise would speak voluntarily. Denise responded within 10 minutes. I wasn't in the room for that first conversation. It belonged to Clara and her attorney. Later that night, Clara asked Denise to come meet all of us at Audrey's office. Denise was 53 with short dark hair and the guarded bearing of someone who had learned through hard experience that any room might hold a trap. She kept her handbag on her lap and both hands pressed over it. "Declan and I were engaged," she said. Clara's breath caught. "How long ago?" 5 years. He probably told you I was a client." "He said he had never been engaged." Denise looked down. "He says whatever keeps the next woman from comparing notes." Their story wasn't a perfect match to Clara's, but the shape was unmistakable. Denise owned a small printing company her parents had founded. Declan came in offering to help modernize it. He set up a new operating company, shifted vendor contracts into it, and talked her into personally guaranteeing a credit line. When that company failed, the debt stuck with Denise while the valuable customer accounts had moved to a separate entity. "Did he take your money?" I asked. "Not in a way I could prove quickly. Every transfer came with a document bearing my signature. Some I remembered signing, some I didn't. He always tucked the important page behind something that looked routine. She had filed a complaint with the Securities Division after finding that her retirement funds had been placed in Ironwood notes. Declan responded by threatening to sue her for fraud, claiming she had invented the investment scheme to hide assets from creditors. He knew my mother had dementia, Denise said. He told me that if I kept going, he would testify that I had misused her power of attorney. I had made bookkeeping errors while caring for her. Nothing criminal, but enough to look damning if someone lined the facts up in the worst possible order. "So you walked away," Clara said. "I signed a confidentiality agreement and carried the debt for 3 years. Denise looked at her. "You're wondering how I could be that foolish?" "No," Clara replied. "I am wondering how many times he rehearsed before he got to me." Denise's eyes filled. "Thank you. She still had emails drafts and 2 voice messages held in an online archive Declan had never known about. One message contained his threat about her mother. Another mentioned Pierce and a clean set of signatures. "Would you give these to the investigators?" Laurel asked. Denise's hands pressed tighter over her bag. "If I do, he will come after me again." "Yes," Laurel said. "We can request protective measures and any retaliation would generate new evidence, but I won't tell you there is no risk." The room went still. Clara spoke quietly. "You do not owe me your pain as proof." Denise studied her for a moment. "When I withdrew my complaint, I told myself I was looking after my mother. After she died, I said it was too late. Then I told myself Declan had probably changed." She looked toward the dark glass of the window. "Maybe silence doesn't get wiser just because we've held it a long time." She agreed to speak with the investigator first thing the next morning. Before she left, Denise turned to me. "He'll go after whatever you're ashamed of," she said. "Not your biggest failure, the one you've buried." I thought of Vera's amendment. "He already did. Then don't keep it buried." That stayed with me all the way home. At midnight, I lifted the lid of the cedar box containing Vera's letters. Tucked inside was a sealed envelope addressed to Clara in my wife's own handwriting. I had come across it many times and had always honored the line written just below the name. "Give this to her when you can trust her with the whole truth." For 5 years, I had read that as permission to weigh Clara's readiness. That night, I understood that Vera might have been measuring mine. I drove back to Harborton and placed the envelope in my daughter's hands. "I have never opened it," I said. Clara traced her mother's writing with one finger. "Why now? Because I finally understand the truth is hers, even if she does something with it I wouldn't choose." She read the letter alone. When she came back, her face was wet, but she was smiling. "Mom said you would hold on too long." "That sounds right." She also said I'd confuse independence with turning down help. "That also sounds right." Clara settled beside me on the sofa in the apartment. She wanted us to manage Witten Court together for 1 year before deciding what came next. I didn't know that. She wrote it after the amendment was done. She said the legal protections were never meant to stand in for a real relationship. We sat in silence for a while. Then Clara rested her head against my shoulder, something she hadn't done since the day we buried Vera. "I am still angry with you," she said. "You should be. But I don't want Declan to be the last important thing that happened between us." "Neither do I." Outside, a car drifted to a stop near the building, its headlights cut off. Clifton spotted it from his office window. He rang the police while I moved Clara back from the front windows. The car sat at the curb for nearly 7 minutes, then pulled away before officers got there. Clifton's exterior camera caught the plate. It traced back to a rental company. Police later confirmed that Declan's consulting firm had taken out the vehicle that afternoon. Declan claimed an employee had been using it. That was the pattern for the next 36 hours. Every fact arrived with a denial already in place. Saturday was supposed to be the wedding day. At 8:00 in the morning, St. Brendan's Church called Clara because Declan had turned up with his brother, the best man, and 2 members of the wedding party. He told the church coordinator that Clara was in the grip of an acute emotional episode and might show up under some form of pressure. He asked that the sanctuary stay open because he believed she'd come around. Clara had Laurel send written confirmation that the event was canceled. Then she phoned the coordinator herself. "Please release the building," she said. "There will be no ceremony." At 9, a florist arrived at Clifton's office with bouquets. The card read, "You are frightened. I forgive you. Come to the church and we can still save our life." Clara brought the flowers to the common room at Witten Court. At 10, calls started coming in from guests. Declan had sent a group message claiming a family emergency had pushed the ceremony back. Clara sent one final correction and turned her phone off. At 11, someone emailed local reporters a packet under the heading "Concerns" regarding management of Witten Family Housing Trust. It contained the anonymous adult protection allegations, selected maintenance complaints going back years, photographs of roof damage taken before repairs were made, and an unsigned claim that tenant rents had been funneled toward my personal expenses. Those personal expenses were a 3-day trip Vera and I took to Gatlinburg the year before her diagnosis. We covered the cost ourselves. The packet matched a trust account withdrawal for roofing materials against a hotel receipt from that same week arranging the two, so that one appeared to have paid for the other. Declan had gotten hold of the maintenance files from Clara's apartment. He had photographed the folders while she was at work. At noon, Mrs. Prentice convened a tenant meeting. No one responds on their own, she announced. If a reporter comes to you, send them to the committee. Vernon Galt ran off copies of the independent audit showing no rent had been diverted. Harold Crane offered to speak publicly about why he believed Declan was targeting the trust. I asked him to hold off until investigators had a chance to advise him. You don't get to decide that for me, Harold said. He was right. At 1, Gwen Fuentes concluded her adult protection assessment. She found no evidence that I lacked capacity, had exploited tenants, or was being manipulated by Clara. She couldn't name the source of the anonymous report, but she put on record that several of the allegations appeared materially false. At 2, my physician completed an emergency cognitive screening I had requested, observed by an independent neuropsychologist. I scored within the expected range for my age with no indication of impairment affecting financial judgment. At 3, the State Securities Division sat down with Denise. At 4, Crestline notified Portside North Holdings that the option agreement appeared fraudulent and walked away from negotiations. At 4:12, Ironwood Capital filed a civil action against Declan Hurst and Pierce Fielding over an unpaid private note of $780,000. The deadline Declan had mentioned in the car had come due. Without Clara's signature, without Witten Court, and without Crestline's assignment payment, Declan had nothing to cover the debt with. At 4:30, he called me. Laurel had instructed us not to engage. I let it go to voicemail. Gerald Declan said, his voice steady. You think you saved your daughter. What you've done is destroy the only future she had. When Ironwood is finished, Clara's name will appear in every filing because she knew about Portside North. Her emails prove it. Meet me at St. Brendan's Church at 6 with the original prenup and the trust certificate. I will remove her name if you sign a statement confirming you authorize the option. If you refuse, your daughter goes down with me. He had finally stopped treating the plan as something theoretical. Laurel played the voicemail twice. Do any of the emails show Clara knew about Portside North? She asked. Clara opened her laptop. 4 messages from Declan came up, each containing that phrase. In every one, he described Portside North as a dormant estate planning company. Clara had written back to one of them. If we ever use it, my lawyer and Dad's trust attorney both need to approve. That line helped, but Declan could still attach her name to documents and put her in the position of defending herself. He wants Gerald to ratify the forged option, Audrey said. That would shore up the assignment payment and redirect criminal exposure. He also wants the trust certificate because the version he used may be incomplete, Iris added. Clara glanced at the clock. If Dad doesn't go, Declan releases whatever he has. He may release it regardless, Laurel said. Then I'll go, Clara replied. Every protective instinct I had rose at once. No! She looked at me. I corrected myself. I am afraid for you to go. So am I. What do you want to do? I want to hear him say the truth out loud while he still thinks I need his permission to survive it. Laurel called the detective. After a long back and forth, they settled on a careful approach. Clara would not face Declan alone. Police would not use her as bait or direct her questions. St. Brendan's had exterior cameras and staff on the premises. Laurel would accompany her inside. Officers would stay close by, given the rental car incident and the threatening voicemail. I would wait across the street. That condition felt unbearable. I accepted it. At 5:55, the evening bells rang out above St. Brendan's Church. The steps were still dressed with white ribbons nobody had thought to take down. Declan was waiting inside the church, where he had expected my daughter to pledge him her life. Clara walked through those doors carrying no ring, no trust papers, and no father to speak on her behalf. I watched from Audrey's car across the street. The sanctuary doors had narrow windows, and all I could make out were shapes moving beneath warm light. Laurel wore a red coat. Clara wore gray. Declan stood near the front pew in the suit he had bought for the wedding. Later, Clara walked me through the conversation, word for word. Declan started by crying. The tears were genuine. That mattered to Clara. She said it was harder to face him. For that reason, he wasn't a machine performing emotion. He was a frightened man, whose whole method was to move his own fear into other people. I made mistakes, he told her. Pierce created the option. Ironwood pushed us. I was trying to secure our future by bringing Witten Court under your control. By unlocking value your father was letting sit idle. Those are people's homes. They are 12 obsolete cottages sitting on development land. We could have relocated everyone and paid for something better. You never asked them. They are tenants, Clara. They don't make capital strategy decisions. That sentence extinguished whatever grief she still held for the relationship. My mother gave them a vote. Declan's expression shifted. What 9 tenants must approve any private redevelopment? He looked toward Laurel. That amendment is invalid if Vera lacked capacity when she signed it. My mother was dying, not incompetent. Gerald pressured her. Everyone who knows him knows how controlling he became. You never met her. I know what you told me. Clara understood in that moment how he operated. Every confidence became inventory. Every painful admission sat on a shelf until he needed something to throw. Did you forge my father's signature? She asked. Pierce handled the option. Did you know it was forged? I knew Gerald had agreed in principle. He had not. He would have if you had stood up to him. Did you take Harold Crane's money? Declan stared at her. Who? Cottage 7. Your former client. His eyes cut toward the door. This is a setup. No, this is the first time we have ever talked where you didn't prepare both sides of the conversation. He stepped toward her. Laurel moved between them, but Clara asked her to hold. You have emails, Declan said. You approve Portside North. If charges come, you'll be investigated too. Your therapy license could be suspended. Patients will find your name. Your father cannot shield you from any of that. Are you offering to protect me? I can take your name out of the internal records in exchange for Gerald confirming the option in exchange for the truth. What truth? That he agreed to sell, but he didn't. Declan lowered his voice. Truth is what can be documented. That was as close as he came to a belief. Clara took out her phone, not to record covertly, but to read the statement Laurel had drafted. My attorney has already notified investigators of every email document and conversation involving Portside North. I waive no rights and admit no wrongdoing. I will not sign anything, ask my father to sign anything, or communicate with you except through counsel. Declan gave a short laugh. You sound like him now. No, I sound like myself with an attorney who represents only me. He reached for her wrist. Laurel said, Do not touch my client. Declan stopped short of contact. Through the glass I saw the movement and pushed the car door open. Audrey caught my sleeve. Wait, it was the hardest instruction I had ever been given. Inside, Declan looked around at the flowers, ribbons, and empty pews. We could still go through with it, he said. The minister is here. Our families aren't far. We can sort out the paperwork after. You still believe the wedding was the thing I wanted most. Wasn't it? I wanted a life where I felt safe enough to stop checking every door. For a moment, he seemed thrown. Clara continued, You made yourself the door. Declan's face hardened. Walk away now, and don't come back when your father dies and leaves you a property you can't unload full of old people who believe gratitude covers the cost of roofs. The sanctuary doors swung open behind him. Harold Crane walked in with Mrs. Prentice and Vernon Galt. They had come to collect the wedding flowers for the common room. None of us had any idea they would appear at that moment. Harold looked directly at Declan. You already took enough from old people, he said. Declan turned toward the side exit. 2 detectives came through before he reached it. They had not come for cruelty for deceiving my daughter, or for the scheme to push me out. Cruelty is not always a chargeable offense. They arrested him on a warrant connected to Harold's forged transfer authorizations and the fraudulent option agreement. Brenda Alford, the notary, had spoken with investigators that afternoon. She admitted Declan had brought her a completed notary page and told her Gerald Witten had signed it during a video meeting. She had never laid eyes on me and never verified my identity. Declan looked through the open doors and saw me standing across the street. For the first time, there was no glass mirror uniform or driver's seat standing between us. He saw me fully. People picture an arrest as a door slamming shut. It is more like a door opening onto a corridor with no visible end. Declan was released on bond the following afternoon. The judge ordered him to have no contact with Harold, Denise, Clara, me, or any Witten Court tenant, but he was not taken away. He went back to his condominium. His attorney put out a statement calling the charges a misunderstanding, born from a vindictive family dispute, and the accounts of unreliable elderly witnesses. That phrase reached Harold before breakfast. He came to my cottage with a printed copy. Unreliable elderly witnesses, he read aloud. They did not even bother to learn our names. His lawyer's job is to manufacture doubt. Then our job is to stay accurate. Harold had spent a career auditing city departments. He built a timeline every call meeting, transfer document, and message accounted for. Denise added her records. Clifton supplied route logs and recording system specifications. Clara indexed her emails. I drafted a statement covering the trust, the forged signature sample, and every point of contact with Declan. Precision became our reply to contempt. 3 days after the arrest, investigators executed a search warrant on Fielding Strategic's offices. Pierce was questioned but not immediately charged. Brenda Alford surrendered her notary journal. The journal held no entry for me because she had never once been in the same room with me. Investigators also turned up draft option agreements for 2 properties with no connection to Witten Court and folders labeled with the names of elderly clients. Declan's operation was wider than we had understood. Ironwood Capital put itself forward as another victim. Its managers claimed that Declan and Pierce had borrowed against investments and counted on Crestline's assignment payment to retire the private note. Iris cautioned us not to accept that story too readily. Predatory lenders often position themselves as innocent once a scheme falls apart, she said. Let the investigators follow the money. Crestline's board brought in outside counsel. The company pulled its zoning request and froze the $600,000 assignment payment. Randall Thorne admitted in writing that Crestline had neglected to verify the option directly with the trust. That admission would matter later. The wedding vendors were a smaller problem, but not a painless one. Some deposits could be recovered, others were gone. Declan's attorney demanded that Clara absorb half of all cancellation costs on the grounds that she had walked away from the event unilaterally. Laurel responded with the fraudulent prenuptial schedule, the threatening voicemail, and a counterproposal. Each side would bear whatever costs it had already incurred in its own name, or Clara would pursue recovery for fraud and emotional distress. Declan accepted within a day. Clara lost $11,000. Justice did not give it back. That detail mattered because genuine escapes almost never come out clean. She had saved for the wedding. She had chosen flowers, invitations, music, and a gown, with Vera's embroidery along the inside of the sleeves, where hardly anyone would ever have noticed it. Ending the engagement was right, but right choices can still leave invoices. One afternoon, I came across her in the common room, staring at an unopened dress box. "Do you want me to take it away?" I asked. "No." "Do you want company?" "Maybe." I sat down beside her. "Everyone keeps telling me how lucky I was," she said. "You were." "I know. But when people say that, it sometimes feels like I am not allowed to grieve. You lost the man you believed he was and the life you thought you were building. Both of those were real to you." She looked at me. "Are you trying to fix this number good? Because you were terrible at it." I laughed, and after a moment, so did she. We opened the dress box together. The gown was simple ivory with Vera's embroidery along the inside of the sleeves, where almost no one would have seen it. Clara touched the fabric. "Mom would have hated Declan. Your mother distrusted any man whose shoes cost more than his refrigerator. That was not an actual rule. It was absolutely an actual rule." Clara smiled, then wept. I held her without telling her the tears were good necessary cleansing or temporary. Grief doesn't always call for an interpretation. Sometimes it only needs a chair and someone who will stay. 2 weeks on, Pierce Fielding asked to speak with prosecutors. His cooperation agreement eventually laid out the whole structure. Declan identified financially vulnerable clients and gathered clean signatures through routine-looking forms. Pierce built the entities and layered the contracts. Brenda notarized paperwork she had never witnessed. Ironwood supplied high-interest money while accepting questionable collateral. Portside North Holdings was meant to collect the Crestline fee, pay off Ironwood, and leave Declan and Pierce with enough to put earlier client complaints to rest. Clara's marriage was not essential to the forged option. It was a layer of insurance, as her husband Declan expected access to her record's credibility when speaking in her name and time, to press her into validating documents once things were in motion. If the forgery was ever challenged, he planned to describe the sale as a family decision that had been blocked by a confused father. The plan rested on 3 assumptions: that I would appear unhinged when provoked, that Clara would be too ashamed to cancel a wedding, and that elderly tenants would hold their silence. He understood our wounds. What he failed to understand was what we would do once we stopped hiding them. 6 weeks after the canceled wedding, I asked Audrey to arrange a formal meeting of the trust. Clara attended alongside Laurel. The tenant committee came with its own independent attorney. Iris joined in her capacity as financial advisor. I set Vera's blue binder in the middle of the table. "I am resigning as sole trustee," I said. Clara stared at me. "Because of the investigation?" "No, because Witten Court is too important to be carried on any single person's judgment, including mine." The trust gave Audrey as protector the authority to appoint an institutional co-trustee while I remained in office. I put forward a regional community trust company with a proven record in affordable senior housing. Significant decisions would require both trustees. The tenant committee would receive quarterly financial reports and hold a formal right of consultation over budgets, repairs, and policy. Clara would serve for 1 year as non-voting family liaison, while she learned the operations from the inside. After that, she could determine whether to pursue a trustee role under the existing standards. "You designed all of this without me?" she asked. The old mistake showing up in a different coat. "I designed a proposal," I said. "Nothing is decided until everyone in this room agrees to it." Mrs. Prentice looked pleased. Across 3 meetings, they dismantled my proposal piece by piece. The tenants wanted a binding vote on any rent increase above inflation, not just a right to be consulted. Clara wanted a reserve policy that would stop the trust from sitting on cash while repairs went unaddressed. Laurel wanted clear conflict of interest provisions. The institutional trustee wanted professional property management and annual external audits. I objected to several of the changes. We adopted them anyway. At the closing meeting, Vernon Galt passed me a small wooden box. Inside sat 12 brass keys, 1 for each cottage. "These are symbolic," he said. "The real locks were changed years back." "I know, I paid the locksmith. Let me have my speech, Gerald." The room laughed. Vernon went on. "You and Vera built a place where older people could hold on to their keys. Somewhere along the way, you lost sight of the fact that the person holding the master key needs limits too." I closed the box. "You're right." The new structure passed without a dissenting vote. After the meeting, Clara and I walked through the garden. Winter had stripped the oaks bare. She was carrying a stack of maintenance reports with questions already marked in the margins. "You know," she said, "I might decide after a year that managing this isn't what I want. I know. And that won't mean Declan was right about me. No. Or that I failed Mom. No." She stopped beside the bench where Vera used to drink her morning coffee. "Would you honestly be all right with that?" I thought about giving her the comforting answer. She had earned the honest one. "I would be disappointed," I said. "Then I would get past being disappointed because the whole point of protecting your choice is that the choice belongs to you." Clara nodded. "That is the most reasonable thing you have said in 10 years. Don't spread it around. I have a reputation to protect." She slipped her arm through mine. The independent medical evaluation had confirmed what I already held to be true. My memory was normal for my age. I misplaced keys from time to time, forgot a name, walked into a room without remembering what I had come for. The specialist made clear that none of those things on their own signified incapacity. The evaluation also noted prolonged grief and anxiety. My first reaction was resentment. Then I remembered how quickly Declan had tried to weaponize my shame about Vera's final months. Denise's words came back, "Don't hide the thing he can use against you." I began meeting with a counselor twice a month. Clara did too, separately. We did not frame it as part of beating Declan. He had already taken up too much space in our decisions. We went because grief had lived between us for 5 years and needed a language that wasn't control or silence. In one session, my counselor asked why I had agreed to drive Clifton's route after decades out of the seat. I missed feeling useful. I said, "Were you useful only when you were driving?" That question irritated me for a full week. Then I grasped what it was pointing at. I had treated usefulness as evidence that I deserved a place in other people's lives. Vera's illness made me helpless against death, so I worked to become indispensable everywhere else. When it came to Clara, my help nearly always carried the unspoken condition that she follow the route I had chosen. Setting down the master keys didn't make me less necessary. It made room for other people to become necessary alongside me. The legal case ran 14 months. Declan's attorney challenged the vehicle recording the search warrants, Brenda's testimony, Harold's memory, Denise's motives, and the authenticity of emails Pierce had produced. Every challenge required a response. Every response consumed time. Harold found the courtroom especially hard to bear. During a preliminary hearing, Declan's lawyer asked whether he had ever forgotten an appointment. Harold said yes. The lawyer asked whether he sometimes needed help making sense of financial statements. Harold said the print was small. The lawyer asked whether grief after his wife's death had clouded his judgment. "Of course it did," Harold answered. "So, you cannot be certain you did not authorize the Ironwood transfers." Harold turned toward the judge. "Counsel is stringing ordinary truths together to construct a lie." The lawyer objected that the answer was non-responsive. The judge allowed it to stand. Harold walked out of that courthouse unsteady on his feet. 40 years of auditing other people's millions, he told me. and one afternoon in a witness chair had left him questioning whether his own signature still meant anything. "That is what the scheme took," he said. "Not only money, Denise paid a cost too." Declan's legal team went after old business records and pressed the claim that she had been careless with her mother's estate. The investigators found nothing on her wrongdoing was ruled out entirely, but the accusation had already spread across online forums. People who had never met her called her greedy. Old clients grew suspicious. Clara wanted to stand up for her in public. Denise said no. "I am learning not to build my life around setting the record straight for people who prefer the worst possible reading," she said. She gave one sworn statement, then went back to her printing company and didn't look up. Pierce pleaded guilty to conspiracy document fraud and securities violations. Brenda pleaded guilty to false notarization and cooperated with prosecutors. When investigators combed through Fielding Strategic's files, they found 8 clients whose signatures had been lifted and reused on investment authorizations. 4 of those clients were over 70. 2 had died before anyone started asking questions. Ironwood Capital's leadership said they hadn't known, but the bank records told a different story. They had received truncated signature pages and watched new client money get redirected. The state filed a separate civil enforcement action on top of everything else. Ironwood eventually gave up its lending license and put money into a restitution fund, all without formally conceding every charge. Crestline Development settled with the Witten Trust and the Tenant Committee covering legal costs, funding accessibility work and agreeing to tighter controls on seller authority going forward. The tenants weren't unanimous. Some pushed for a full public trial. Others said another winter without repairs wasn't something they could afford to wait through. They debated. They voted. In the end, it was their call to make. Meanwhile, Declan held out against a plea deal for months, insisting Pierce had led him astray. Brenda had acted on her own, he said. Harold had signed off on the transfers. I had approved the option before reversing course. Then, investigators pulled an audio memo from his office server, his own recorded voice, use Witten's signature from the lender form. "Keep Clara off the option until after the wedding. If the old man complains, Shay gives us the letter." After that, there was nothing left to argue. Declan pleaded guilty to 1 count of financial exploitation of an older adult, 2 counts of forgery, conspiracy to commit fraud, and securities violations. Additional counts were dropped under the terms, but the judge weighed the full scope of his conduct when it came time to impose a sentence. Clara decided against speaking in the courtroom herself. She wrote a statement and asked Laurel to deliver it on her behalf. "Declan Hurst did not steal a wedding from me. He used the promise of marriage to gain access to people records and trust. Please do not measure the harm only by the money he failed to obtain. He coached me to distrust my own father, then turned that distrust into a weapon. He mistook affection for leverage. I am asking the court to understand that coercive financial schemes hollow out families well before a single dollar changes hands." Harold addressed the court after her. "I am 77 now," he said. "The defendant found my age useful. It was cover. If I flagged a missing sum, I was simply muddled. If I put pen to paper, I was suddenly sharp enough to bind myself. He required me to be competent when my signature was worth something to him, and confused whenever my recollection complicated his story." Denise said nothing aloud. Her earlier statement went in under seal. I had written out 4 full pages. Standing there, I delivered 4 sentences. Mr. Hurst operates on the belief that people stop existing the moment he looks away. Harold had not stopped existing. Denise had not stopped existing. The people living at Witten Court were not line items on a site plan, and my daughter was not simply a signature waiting at the far end of a wedding aisle. I asked for a sentence that protects the people he still refuses to see. The judge handed down 7 years in prison, supervised release to follow, and a restitution order tied to whatever assets could be located. Declan forfeited his professional licenses. A portion of the stolen money came back through frozen accounts and the various settlements. Harold recovered much of what he had lost, though not every cent. Denise's outstanding debt was examined and partially offset through the restitution fund. Nobody came out whole. That is a truth most retellings quietly sidestep. The law can identify a harm, bring it to a halt, and make the perpetrator answer for it. What it cannot do is hand back the years that passed untouched by all of this. What it can offer survivors is solid ground, a starting point that belongs to them, free of the thief's preferred narrative. A year to the day after Declan's sentencing, Clara called and asked me to come to St. Brendan's Church. I didn't ask for an explanation. The white ribbons were a distant memory. Early spring, and the rain had turned the stone steps dark, the same shade they'd been on the morning I sat in that car, and first understood what Declan had in mind. Clara was waiting inside the sanctuary, empty around her. She wore jeans, a gray sweater, and Vera's garnet earrings. When she caught sight of my expression, "This is not another wedding," she said. I held my tongue. Your eyebrows didn't. She brought me down to the front pew. For the better part of a year, she had been involved with a support group serving people touched by romance-based financial fraud. The label had chafed at first. Declan hadn't actually succeeded in taking her money. The group's facilitator pointed out that a burglary someone didn't finish still leaves you jumping at sounds in the hallway. Clara had quietly started meeting one-on-one with women who were still weighing whether to leave. She didn't steer them toward any particular door. She helped them assemble their own records, find counsel with no strings attached, and carve out mental space where they could think clearly. I needed to walk back in here and not feel like the room still belonged to him, she told me. We sat in the same spot where she had faced him down. What do you want to carry out of here instead? I asked that I walked out. You did? I want to remember that you waited across the street, even though the waiting probably shaved 10 years off your life. At least 12. And I want to remember Harold opening the door. We stayed until the rain let up. On our way out, Clara slipped an envelope into the church donation box, the money she'd clawed back from a vendor deposit that had been canceled. She asked that it fund the congregation's emergency housing work. That same afternoon, Wittencourt threw open its gates for the first annual community day under the new governance structure. Families planted kitchen herbs, freshened up the benches with paint, and built out shelving for a lending library. Crestline's settlement money had already bought new roofing, better lighting along the walkways, and backup generators. Mrs. Prentice stood under a hand-painted banner, "Our Court, Our Voice." "The comma matters," she announced to the assembled crowd. Nobody was sure what she meant, but removing it was out of the question. Clara wrapped up her year as family liaison and caught me off guard by filing to stay another 2 years still without going through a formal trustee vote. "I am not ready to run things yet," she said. "But I like learning. Your mother would be proud." "Are you very?" I gave her an answer and left it at that. Harold launched a monthly workshop on making sense of financial statements. Denise produced the handouts at her cost. Clifton arranged rides for any resident who needed to get to a fraud reporting office. Iris worked with the tenant committee on spotting the warning signs, predatory lending terms, manufactured urgency paperwork, designed to tuck real authority somewhere behind the signature lines. I took the wheel, not because there was no one else, but because it suited me. Settlement funds covered a second-hand accessible van, and we lettered Wittencourt Community Transport along the side. 2 mornings a week I made the rounds, clinics, supermarkets, the library branch, the riverfront market. Everyone on board knew my name. They also knew the van had a camera running, because Mrs. Prentice had insisted the disclosure notice be printed large enough for any developer who fancied himself clever to read without squinting. In time, Clara sold the wedding dress. She held on to Vera's embroidery and had Denise stitch it into a small blue pillow for the bench outside Cottage 1. That year, no new relationship entered the picture. Nobody pushed her toward one. When she felt the moment was right, she had dinners with friends, traveled to Maine on her own, and found herself laughing without scanning the room first for permission. Our Sunday calls kept going, but the texture changed. Some weeks she came to me with questions. Other weeks she told me what she had decided past tense. Now and then, I took issue with it. We didn't break under the weight of that, which may have been the deepest mending of all. I find myself returning in my mind to those early mornings behind the wheel of Clifton's dark green Buick. Declan rode in the back seat for 15 trips. He held forth on money, influenced my daughter, the people at Wittencourt, convinced apparently that the driver was furniture. He read service as weakness. He read age as vacancy. The final morning I ferried him anywhere he dangled the threat that Clara might pick him, and I would be left with nothing. That possibility dug in. Had I gone straight to her door, laid down an ultimatum, and commanded her to walk away from the wedding, Declan might have won the whole game without ever filing a document. He would have handed Clara living proof of every ugly thing he'd told her about me. A man who gets angry tightens his grip and calls it protection. The most punishing thing about guarding my daughter was sitting with the knowledge that the outcome was never mine to dictate. I could hold on to the evidence. I could be honest. I could keep faith with the trust the property placed in me. I could own my mistakes out loud. I could stand on the far curb and wait. Walking out of that church, that part was hers alone to do. There is a photograph held to my refrigerator with a magnet. Someone snapped it at Community Day. Mrs. Prentice is in the foreground, both hands wrapped around the ceremonial master key box. Vernon and Harold stand just behind her. Clifton leans on a cane he no longer needs but won't give up. Denise and Iris are bickering cheerfully about the right way to lay out the pamphlets. Clara stands next to me with one arm settled around my waist. Nobody in that photograph has disappeared. Last Tuesday, I picked up a new resident from the train station. His name was Virgil Dempsey, a retired mail carrier who had moved into Cottage 9 after a fall, made the staircase in his old house more than he could manage. He climbed into the van, read the recording notice posted on the dash, and looked up. "You the driver?" he asked. "I am." "You own the place. No one person owns what happens here." He gave me a puzzled look. So I explained one of the trustees, one of the people who got things started, Clara's father, and the man responsible for delivering him to his cardiology appointment on Thursday. "That's a lot of jobs," he said. "Only one of them matters." While the van was moving, I adjusted the mirror. Seatbelt comfortable. Yes. Temperature all right. A little warm. I brought it down 2 degrees. As we made our way through Harborton, Virgil talked his wife, his kids the streets on his old mail route, the dog that had come after him every Wednesday without fail for 11 years. I listened, not because his story might someday be useful, not because I was gathering anything, but because listening is how we tell another person the world still holds a space shaped exactly like them. At a red light, I glanced into the mirror. The man looking back at me was 73 now. His beard had gone whiter. The lines beside his eyes had settled deeper. He still made his share of mistakes. He still held on past the point he should have. He still sometimes mistook steering for helping, but he was learning. Vera used to say, "Dignity is not something we give another person. It is something we recognize." Declan never recognized the driver sitting in front of him, or the woman beside him, or the people whose homes he intended to swallow up. That failure of sight cost him everything he believed he had in hand. I cannot bring myself to say I am grateful for how things unfolded. Harold lost money. Denise lost years of quiet she will never get back. Clara lost her faith in someone she had genuinely loved. I lost the comfortable story I had been telling myself that good intentions made my secrecy forgivable. But the truth opened a door. We chose to walk through it out into the open. We chose to draw a line around power even when it was power we held over people we cared about. We chose to trust older people at their word without letting age stand in for either wisdom or weakness. And my daughter found her own way home. When the light went green, Virgil was still on the dog. I checked the road ahead, brought the van forward gently, and kept on listening. That is where the story leaves us, not with a courtroom victory, but with something quieter and harder to name. A father standing at a kitchen window, a photograph on the refrigerator, a daughter who found her own way home. I think about what all of this cost. Harold lost money he had spent a lifetime earning. Denise lost years of peace she should never have had to sacrifice. Clara lost her trust in a man she had genuinely loved. And I lost the comfortable lie I had told myself that keeping secrets so long as my intentions were good was a form of protection. I believe God has a way of pulling the hidden things into the light, not to humiliate us, but to give us a chance to do better. That is what the truth did for our family. If these father stories have taught me anything worth passing on, it's this. Do not wait until you are certain before you speak. Silence held too long becomes its own kind of deception. If someone you love is being isolated from the people who know them best, pay attention. That pattern rarely arrives alone. Document what you witness. A record made quietly and honestly is worth more than a confrontation made in anger. And when your children need room to make their own choices, even choices that frighten you, give it to them. A father's real strength is knowing when to wait across the street. This story is what I'd call a dad's revenge. Not a revenge of anger, but of patience, evidence, and love that refused to be used as a weapon. If it moved you, I hope you'll share it with someone who might need to hear it. Leave a thought in the comments, I do read them. And if you haven't yet come and join us here on His Hidden Revenge, there are more stories waiting. Thank you for listening all the way through. Take good care of yourself, and I'll see you in the next one.